Thank you, Dr. Monto. An awful lot has been said that's very, very interesting and that I agree with, and I'd like to make a few comments. I think the likelihood that this vaccine is going to be effective is pretty likely in the 6 to 11-year-old age group. The issue is side effects or adverse events that might be occurring after this vaccine. And I'm torn. On one hand, we know that many mothers and fathers and parents are eager to administer this vaccine to children because they're so frightened, perhaps overly so, but they're so nervous about this vaccine because of what's been stated, that they really are anticipating having access to this vaccine in children. On the other hand, I think we saw that approximately 68% of the children who are hospitalized with COVID-19 have underlying comorbidities. So that means about 32% do not. And then if we were to take 40% of that group that may have immunity already, we're getting down to a very small percent of otherwise healthy 6 to 11-year-old children who might derive some benefit. And we simply don't know what the side effects are going to be. We don't, for example, it's not even clear that this vaccine will reduce rates of transmission. We're hoping that's the case, but we don't know. This vaccine is probably not going to prevent infection. It's going to prevent severe disease. So my worry is that I think my thought is that this vaccine should be available for those parents who are very eager to get it for their child, and because their child has a comorbidity, or they're concerned themselves. But I'm just worried that if we say yes, that the states are going to mandate administration of this vaccine to children in order to go to school, and I do not agree with that. I think that would be an error at this time until we get more information about the safety. So I think I agree with what everyone else is saying here. We're in a very difficult decision-making process. Over.
Today and taken a lot of questions about these different models, and we see that we can reach different conclusions to some extent based on the assumptions that the models are built on. And one of the factors, of course, is how much coronavirus is circulating in a community at a given point in time. And then other factors as well. What will the actual myocarditis rate be in these younger kids who may be less susceptible to myocarditis? But right now, that's a speculation. We don't know that for sure. And the studies were empowered really to answer that question in the 5 to 11-year-olds. So I'm just pointing out some broad-based themes that are running through my mind as we're having this conversation. It's a very meaningful one, and.
Some early clinical data. And yeah, we're worried about all of these. We're worried about a side effect that we can't measure yet, but it's probably real. And we see a benefit that isn't the same as it is in older age groups. So for me, I think it's going to revolve around two questions. First off, whether there is going to be a use for this vaccine in this age group, and then how the decision gets made to use it within this age group. And I think what sways me here is that is a very sort of personal choice. If I had a child who was a transplant recipient, I would really want to be able to use a vaccine like this. And there are certainly kids who probably should be vaccinated. The question of how broadly to use it, though, I think is a substantial one. And I know it's not our question, but I know we're kind of punting that to ACIP. But I do think that it's a relatively close call, and as Dr. Levy just said, as Dr. Gann said, it really is going to be a question of what the prevailing conditions are. But we're never going to learn about how safe the vaccine is unless we start giving it. Yeah.
There are high-risk individuals, and I think they do need to be attended to. That we do need to provide a vaccine for them. But for many others, one dose or no dose, even if they've had prior COVID infection, I think they may not need anything more. The last point I would make is that we are vaccinating with a prototype spike protein that is no longer circulating. And so we have to go to higher and higher levels in order to get efficient potency in terms of neutralization. Everyone is focused on Delta right now, but Delta is on the decline. We can anticipate that the future variants are going to be more distantly related, and simply boosting, which we're likely to need to do in this population in 6 months if all we're relying on is neutralizing titers, is going to become harder and harder to do. So I think we need to more carefully evaluate exactly the vaccination schemes that we want going forward, and we simply don't have the data right now to make those decisions.
Several thoughts here. And one of the things that's really been impactful for me is to learn that the prevalence in children might already be 42%, which means that 30 million of the 72 million children in our country may have some form of immunity to the virus already. The other thing is that I was disappointed that the number of minorities in the Pfizer study was such a small percentage of the total, because they bear the brunt of disease and hospitalizations. And it just seems to me that in some ways we're vaccinating children to protect the adults, and it should be the other way around, that if 30 million children already have some form of immunity, they've made their contribution to herd immunity already, and our focus should be to get the adults vaccinated to protect the children. So this is a really tough one for me, but I do believe that children at highest risk do need to be vaccinated, but vaccinating all of the children to achieve that just seems a bit much for me. So I'm having some challenges with this one. But those are my thoughts, Dr. Martel. Thank you.
So I do, we're all concerned about the myocarditis issue, and I do think the model has overestimated the hospitalizations prevented because of prior immunity and the inclusion of some kids who were hospitalized for reasons other than COVID. But I also think the high estimate of myocarditis is probably too conservative, based on the natural history of myocarditis generally being less common in this age group. I'll paraphrase Dr. Fauci, who said models are what you rely on until you get the data, and then you throw out the models. So the models are the best we have at the moment. As was just mentioned, we are not going to get the data unless we start to use this vaccine. I do think we need it as a tool in our armamentarium for high-risk children, for equity issues, for parents who really would like to protect their children, and because of the long-term, very profound implications of schools being disrupted and the social and educational impact that that's having on her. So I agree that it's going to be a fluid situation. A reminder that an EUA is not a permanent situation, and that could change based on either additional side effect data or depending on what happens with the pandemic.
If you're a parent and you have a 7 or 8 year old, and the federal government is going to insist that those kids get vaccinated, or if you live in a state like California where Governor Newsom is going to do that and so forth, and he has a horrific record, most of these governors do, not all, but most, what would you do? Would you get your kid vaccinated? Would you talk to your local doctor? What would you do?
If the child has chronic conditions that make their risk appreciable, then there's a reason that they should be considered for vaccination. Other than that, if it were my child, I would homeschool them. Honestly, I would organize with other parents to take them out of the school and create homeschooling environments. There's no choice. Your child's life is on the line. It's not a high risk. Vaccination is not a high risk that's going to kill every child by doing so. However, it's enough of a risk that on the average, the benefit is higher for homeschooling than it is for vaccination and being in school.